Hey everyone, Bond here for the Ghost Furnace. I am not joined by our good friend Nick Pennsylvania tonight. We spent the better part of a half an hour trying, probably a little longer actually, trying to record an episode for you all this evening. We've had audio issues in the past, but never internet connectivity issues like we saw today. Did all the troubleshooting we could, and everything we could tell was working fine on our end. Like our up and down times were just fine. So we're not sure if Zoom, which is what we use to record the actual sessions outside of our computers, if they were having a problem or what. But we didn't want that to stop us from getting you all another episode this week, a full-length episode this week. So what we have is I put together a amalgamation of 3 Dr. PA episodes that were all recorded around the same time in 2020. Now, the first one we're going to play is around a Butler UFO sighting. The reason this is topical is because we were trying to record a UFO-centric episode tonight about some government reports. And we were kind of joking about how, as soon as we start talking about UAPs and government reports, the internet stops working. Kind of like joking about it, but then it kept happening. So, not saying anyone's trying to thwart us, but it is a kind of funny coincidence. So yeah, we have the Butler UFO episode. We have a Decker Rain Man episode, which I know we've talked about that previously. In the Ghost Furnace, and I think we've just mentioned it though, so this is a fun little kind of deep dive into that. And then one of our favorite stories is the Black Wolf of Oak Valley, which is just a fun little story. So I have all 3 of those back to back for you all, so you still get a full-length episode this week. The other reason we wanted to make sure we were able to talk to everyone this week is next episode, 128, is going to be with our good friend Timothy Grieve Carlson, which we're very excited about talking with him about Johannes Kelpius, which is something I've been wanting to talk with him for quite some time, even before we had him on a few months back. So really looking forward to that conversation, and also really excited to share with you some old Dr. PA episodes, because again, I think these are really fun. Please excuse the audio quality. I'm doing my best to kind of like normalize them, but they are old. So apologies in advance, but the content is still, I think, worth sharing and enjoying. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feelings, and you would like to reach out to us, as always, you can find us on Instagram or YouTube at The Ghost Furnace Podcast, or you can send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com. So I'm going to go ahead and play these 3 episodes for you, and hope everyone has a wonderful week, and we'll talk soon.
Most of my friends have equal parts interest and skepticism about all things spooky or mysterious. Ghosts, UFOs, legendary monsters, all sorts of things. Never believing in such things, but remaining passionately in love with the ideas, and at the same time maintaining just a little bit of fear in case that fraction of a % inside of us that hasn't written these ideas off completely may be proven correct after all. Blame it on our youth, I suppose. Our childhood was shadowed by the Great Satanic Panic, which is a time I don't think people consider much enough these days, though doing so may be to the benefit of a social sobriety. Talk shows and even the nightly news at the time was filled with all sorts of spooky things told as if they were true. Ghostbusters was a popular movie franchise that spun off a cartoon show and action figures and introduced less literary or folklore-inclined kids to such legends as the ghost of Casey Jones, the Phantom Engineer, and other such things. In the mornings before school, 2 episodes of In Search of with Leonard Nimoy came on, and I could only watch the first half of the second episode before I'd have to run to the elementary school, which was on the next block. And of course, there was Unsolved Mysteries with the stentorian Robert Stack. The past decade saw an incredible rise in shows about ghosts. Even the Animal Planet network had a ghost story show, making sure to mention that the people being interviewed had pets, so as to not completely lose the Animal Planet's target audience. This is cyclical, I suppose, as such programs were wicked popular in the 1980s as well. The now fading crop, though, which in my memory was spearheaded by ghost hunters, had its own spin. More recently, cryptoid and alien shows have started to overtake the various ghost shows, their market having become saturated. The popularity of UFOs stays at about a low hum with occasional spikes in popularity. It seems to me that the 1950s and 1970s were big spikes in the general fascination with the idea of UFOs, but that was all before my time. But my older friends and my friends' parents grew up then, and I have two different stories from the same event. This is the story of the Butler County UFO. I met my friend Michael in second grade. We were pretty fast friends through middle school, and though we remained friendly, we were closer when we were young. I only occasionally speak with him. The last time was about 2 years ago when he was back in the country, having moved to Germany about 10 years ago, where he is an opera singer. Michael's job has absolutely nothing to do with this story, but it's just too interesting not to mention. Anyhow, years back, I'm in Michael's family's van going back to their farm from someplace. I think we were in Pittsburgh for something. Michael's mom is driving, and it's just Michael, myself, and his slightly younger brother, Ben, in the van. It's late at night, and we're on a country road, and we're sharing spooky stories of local haunts when Ben and Michael asked their mom to tell the story of the UFO. She told the story simply, honestly, without building it up. It didn't sound rehearsed, but it sounded like something she had told many times, like a police statement or something like that. If there was an emotion in her voice, it was something closer to mild confusion than anything else, and the story went like this. Michael's mom had grown up somewhere in the country outside Butler, Pennsylvania, which is the seat of Butler County. A teenager in the 1970s, this occurred one late spring, early summer evening around 1974. There is a drive-in movie theater off Route 8 just north of Butler, and it's still in operation, having opened up in 1958. Michael's mom was there one evening with a few friends. I only remember specific parts of the story, and I don't know if certain details were not mentioned or have just been forgotten. But a UFO, vaguely acorn-shaped, lands on the grounds of the drive-in theater, on the hillside near the tree line in the back end of the property. Was it in the middle of a movie? Was it between showings? I cannot remember or have forgotten, but she told us that there wasn't a panic. Everyone just got quiet and looked at the hillside. Someone quietly asked if it was a proper promotion for a film that was happening. There were certainly a number of UFO films in 1974, including a documentary featuring Rod Serling and Meredith Burgess. Whatever, though, the craft didn't stay too long before it lifted back up and away. And that was the story. The group which Michael's mom had gone to the drive-in with were pretty freaked out and spoke about the night for a long while, and it just kind of passed into the family lore. Clearly, I thought about that story a lot. My natural inclination is to believe that it was some sort of stunt for a movie. There are multiple screens at the drive-in in question which, with the exception of digital projectors installed a few years ago, is much the same today as it was when it first opened. The craft was said to have landed near the tree line up the hill in the back of the drive-in. I'm assuming it had lights emanating from it. Why assume it was a movie stunt? Why would a presumed alien craft land for a few minutes in a relatively rural section of western Pennsylvania just to then lift off minutes later? Could it have been an experimental military craft? I doubt it, just because there are way too many better places to do something like that. That was where my conclusions were, until years later in my 20s when I was working for a nonprofit in Butler. One of my co-workers was a good 20 years older than myself. We got along, and once, well, I should say, she even taught me how to make pumpkin rolls. I used to help her out because she would make dozens of them for some reason or another every Christmas, but that has, again, nothing to do with the story. But we were in a car quite often, and one day we were heading on 422 towards Lawrence County, and we passed this small town where she had grown up. Again, this being just outside of Butler along Route 422. We had likely passed by this spot together on a number of occasions, but she pointed out her grandmother's house visible from the road, and I'd heard some of her stories before. But one day I brought up Michael's mother's story about the UFO, and my co-worker, who we'll call Becky, she knew of it. Not of Michael's mother's perspective, but knew about a UFO thing that had happened at the drive-in. She spoke about having been playing out in the street that day. She'd been on her bike. It was early in the summer, she said, around dusk, and she saw a light in the sky and a strange craft flying low in the sky. She said it moved slowly, quietly, and cut across at an angle from the road on which she was on. And that was it. That was all she remembered seeing. But it obviously caused a conversation. Neither one of these stories was particularly detailed. Neither seemed to be embellished, and if they weren't embellished in a particularly interesting way, aside from the general topic being UFOs. The timeline and the locations, the sites being maybe 10 miles from one another, obviously had me wondering if they weren't two stories concerning the same event. Did I believe it? I mean, I believe their stories. Michael's mother didn't tell it like it was some story to freak us kids out, really. Like I said, it was more akin to someone reading a press statement or a police report. Besides, it seems like it could have easily been a stunt relating to a movie. Becky, she was a bit younger, 10 or maybe 12 years old, and maybe she did see something. I know that she was familiar with the supposed UFO sighting at the drive-in. Obviously, when she told me the story, she said she remembered the day that it happened and having seen something shortly before dusk. Is it possible that she saw something and didn't understand it up in the sky? And over the time, the two stories converged as a means of an explanation? That doesn't sound improbable either. One of the curious things to me was how little spread the story was. In our photos on our Dr. Pennsylvania Facebook page, we've documented the Black Cross of Butler, which is off 422 also. The Black Cross of Butler is a series of mass graves from the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. I'd read about these graves in a dusty old book in a library, but I'd never heard anyone, including older friends whose families had been in the region for generations, talk about it. And I had started to wonder if these graves were real at all until the year 2002 when a state historical marker was established at the site. Maybe most people knew the craft at the drive-in was a gimmick, but Michael's mother and the others in her party did not. It would explain why the story wasn't as widespread as, say, the infamous Kecksburg crash near Greensburg, PA in Westmoreland County, the documents of which have recently become declassified. Or maybe like the Black Cross, it was just a thing that happened and was nearly forgotten about. I tried to find other stories, other documentation about this incident in the mid-1970s in Butler, Pennsylvania. I even went to Stan Gordon, Western Pennsylvania's well-known writer on UFOs and cryptids, whose career was catalyzed by the aforementioned Kecksburg happenings. Stan's public notes contain nothing, but then I went to the National UFO Reporting Center, which catalogs sightings and even attempts to explain some, such as mistaken planets and likely meteors. I sorted through the time period and came across this one account which the author states occurred on June 15th, approximately 1974. June 15th was a Saturday night, which, a popular night for the drive-in. The author was living roughly 15 minutes north of the drive-in theater. They wrote, "We were kids, about 14 years old at the time. We live in a rural area. A friend and I were walking up a dirt road when we got to the top of a small hill. 3 lights in a triangle lit up just above a telephone pole. I remember it made no sound and did not move. The only other thing I remember is running home. I can't remember even telling my parents. Years later, I seen my childhood friend that was with me and I asked him if he remembered that night. He did, but that was it. We never talked about it again. I wish I could remember more about that night or have a chance to see them again now that I'm older. Every time I see a program about UFOs, I think about that night. I know we're not alone. Nobody can tell me different." I can't think of a clean way to say all the following, so I'm just going to throw everything out there. I've already mentioned the Kecksburg incident, and Kecksburg really isn't that far away from Butler. I think it's about 60 miles maybe, and Butler shares a very small, but we do share a border of sorts with Westmoreland County. The craft at the Kecksburg incident was acorn-shaped. So here's something that I've thought about, and it makes sense. Kecksburg was a high-profile UFO event which occurred about 9 years before the Butler incident. When I heard Michael's mother tell me the story, I remember her saying that the craft was acorn-shaped. But did I? Because the Kecksburg event happened, as I said, about a decade before the incident in Butler. Was her memory influenced by that earlier crash in the same way I postulated Becky's memories of a childhood mystery had merged with another story as a way of explaining the unknown? Or maybe I only remember Michael's mother saying it was acorn-shaped. Maybe I, as a child predisposed to reading and listening about such things, had inserted this detail. I know for certain that I was aware of the Kecksburg crash, even if I did not think of it as a local event as when I was a kid. On a side note, for as long as I can remember, I thought acorn-shaped spacecraft were stupid. I can't imagine it being practical, the Apollo command module being an exception, maybe. But acorn-shaped interstellar travel, I've always thought that was a bad design. It's my long-held opinion of this is certain, and that is one of the few things I can truly believe in. I've been to that drive-in a number of times. During the summer months, they have flea markets there on weekend mornings. I have 2 memories of the flea market, and they both occurred at the same visit. First off, there was a Charles Lindbergh Spirit of St. Louis inspired radio, and I passed it up. The guy was asking $40, and dang, I have looked at eBay this very evening, and the cheapest one I can see is for $125, and the tape deck doesn't stay closed. I should have swung on it then. $40? I don't usually keep regrets, but that one really nags me. More importantly, though, the other memory I have of being at the flea market that day at the drive-in is walking toward the tree line behind the snack bar and looking out and remembering the story I had heard years ago while driving a dark country road in my friend's family van and wondering what exactly happened that night.
About 10 years ago, I was waking up in a small motel in the Poconos. I was walking back and forth from the bathroom to the television, catching the local news along the way, waiting on the weather, and eager to check out and walk next door to the diner. The diner had baklava, and the sandwich the night before was pretty good, and I was eager to explore their breakfast offerings prior to spending the better part of a workday driving west, back toward Butler County, preferably with a stop in Evansburg. As I'm throwing yesterday's clothes into my small tweed suitcase, I begin to hear an arson story. A guy had set a local restaurant on fire. According to the suspect, he was asked by the restaurant's owner to set the fire. And none of that was especially interesting to me, but what did catch my ear and then my eye was that the news anchor spoke about how this guy was known about the Stroudsburg area as he'd been involved with the Stroudsburg police in a strange situation. The man, it was said, could make it rain. His story was even featured on Unsolved Mysteries, a show I watched regularly as a kid, and his story had been corroborated by police officers. This is the strange tale of Don Decker, Rain Man. Don Decker's rain story begins early in 1983 when at the age of 20 or 21 his grandfather died. Don was 20 or 21, not his grandfather. I realize that's kind of an ambiguous sentence. Don's grandfather was 63 when he died in the Stroudsburg area, but I've seen Don's age being reported as both 20 and 21. This is an awesome start. Anyhow, according to the Unsolved Mysteries episode, Don had been furloughed from the county jail where he was serving a brief sentence for having received stolen property. The county in question was the Monroe County, and the county jail in question was the Monroe County Correctional Facility, none of this being identified on the Unsolved Mysteries segment. Following his grandfather's funeral, Don stayed with some friends in their rented home on Ann Street in Stroudsburg, which is right downtown between McMichael Creek and Main Street thereabouts. The residence, though, has since been demolished. All right, so there are a couple different versions of the story. One, the one documented in the 1993 episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and from what I gather, a slightly different version which was chronicled on a 2011 episode of Paranormal Witness. It is my assumption that the discrepancies in each story come down to two main factors. One, the story had changed over the course of 30 years. And number two, and this is likely a smaller factor, the stories were edited for television time constraints. I'm going to try to tell the most complete story, but each incarnation of the story finds Don stating that his recently deceased grandfather had been physically abusive to him since he had been a young child. The subsequent funeral and adoration upon the recently deceased was what prompted Don to stay with his friends, and it would be at their Ann Street residence that the rain would begin. Later on, in 2011, it was stated that Don's mother would not allow him to stay at her home, so he went to stay with his friends, the Kiefers. Earlier stories state that the rain began after dinner at the Kiefers. The rain began in the living room, having been preceded by a cold vibration which Don felt through his body. He then fell into a stupor, a trance-like state, as the rain began running down the walls, isolated, it seems, to the living room. In later tellings, though, it is said that Don fell on the bathroom floor and had a vision of an old man wearing a crown staring at him. I've also read that he saw the vision of the old man through the window of the upstairs bathroom and then fell. He got up to find scratches upon his wrists, and then he went downstairs to supper when the rain would start, being immediately preceded by a loud noise. A quick aside, I definitely think this was added to the story later, this whole bit about the old man and the crown. Because why would Unsolved Mysteries not have run with a ghostly bathroom visitor? I just can't imagine such a program passing that up for a boring old run-of-the-mill cold chill in the living room. And plus, could you imagine the reenactment? Moving on. The Kiefers telephoned their landlord right away. There's some plumbing emergency, clearly. There's water just everywhere. And that assumption was completely reasonable, that there was a plumbing issue. Upon arrival, the landlord assured everyone that there was no plumbing behind the walls in the living room. All the plumbing was in the back of the house where the kitchen and above it bathroom were. The landlord himself said as much for the Unsolved Mysteries crew. Going further is to state that the water was coming not just from the ceiling down, but also the floor up, even horizontally, a claim that was further corroborated by a couple of Stroudsburg police officers. The Kiefers and their landlord noticed that Decker was in a trance-like state and decided to call the police. Two officers, Don Bujan, and I hope I'm saying that right, and Richard Wolbert responded to the call, with Bujan stating in multiple interviews that the rain was localized to the living room and droplets could be seen flying horizontally. They contacted the chief of police, a man named Roberts, who did not feel that the situation was an appropriate police matter and requested them to leave. A lot of folks really drive home that Chief Roberts told the responding officers not to file a report. The officers came back the next day, though, against orders of the chief, and this time they were accompanied by a third cop, an Officer Davies. They tried some experiments, which Unsolved Mysteries reenacted by showing the police officers placing a large brown paper bag over Don's head. Then, with the paper bag on his head, again for science, the police watched as Don was thrown, as if by some invisible force, across the room. Police noted that the rain in the house would stop when Don would step outside. Officer Bujan stated that Don was burned by a gold cross. This would become thematic, and the Unsolved Mysteries episode would conclude with visiting a pizzeria where shortly after Don's entrance it would begin raining, and there was a burning hot crucifix there as well. Now again, here's where the 1993 and the 2011 versions of the story again differ. After 3 days being turned down for multiple denominations, an evangelical reverend performed an exorcism and all would be well again. The landlord stated in interviews that he was there for the exorcism and watched Don Decker convulse and curl into a ball. The Unsolved Mysteries story may be abbreviated, but again, because of how spectacular it claims, I have doubts, because Don did return to the correctional facility shortly after his wet and wild weekend with the Kiefers, but not before additional claims such as being levitated and thrown about the house. The rain would not stop when he was back in his cell. This is according to the Paranormal Witness episode that states further he had control of the rain and utilized it to secure a private cell, among other things. This would all end when the warden, and here I'm quoting Sci-Fi Channel's website, immediately called in the prison chaplain for an exorcism. The more the priest spoke, the more Don smelled rotting flesh. The room filled with rain, but it never hit the Bible in the chaplain's hands. The odor became more intense. Don knew he smelled death. Don screamed in agony, and the rain stopped. The chaplain called out to escape the room. Don opened his eyes, hoping it was all over. So, again, here's the difference. Unsolved Mystery said there was an exorcism in the Kiefers' home, and then all was resolved after that, all in the span of 3 or 4 days. The Paranormal Witness show states that Don had not only continued to make it rain when he was back in the correctional facility, but also now had some control over it. So was the Kiefers' landlord present at the jail exorcism? I have a hard time believing that for a few reasons, but namely the urgency with which the latter exorcism supposedly occurred. Why would they invite him? Also, each telling suggests that Don was possessed by the spirit of his abusive grandfather, or at least the evil which made his grandfather abusive. And the landlord's wife claims that the longer the evangelical reverend prayed, the more she could feel a change in the house and not a change in the Monroe County Correctional Facility. It isn't possible for both these stories to be true, but it is possible for both of them to be false. Further, the Paranormal Witness episode claims that on a dare from guards, Don was able to make a raindrop move through several locked doors, presumably through a keyhole, and hit the warden square in the chest. For the sake of argument, I'm going to say the guy is possessed by the spirit of his abusive grandfather who, for some unknown reason, gives Don the power to make it rain, maybe as some sort of weird trade-off for being able to make him levitate and to scratch him. I don't know Who knows how these things work? But let's say I give you all of that. Am I supposed to believe that Don can also see through doors and walls, not just hit a corrections officer, but also do so directly in the chest? I know I'm coming at this a little harder from the skeptical angle than I normally do. Not that I'm not typically skeptical of such things, but I feel like I've been especially hard on this one, as I am, say, the supposed lost gold of central Pennsylvania, but for much the same reasons. There are two very similar stories which appear to originate from the same person. But that said, there are multiple people, including landlords and police officers, who continue to this day to claim that what they experienced was real. Who am I to doubt what they experienced? This was going on for, at a minimum, a weekend, and if the 2011 version of the story is true, longer. So why are there no pictures or film? I've seen other people bring this up only to be told that camcorders and other such devices were not so easily obtainable in 1983, and I agree, but that doesn't mean that they weren't available, or at least a camera, especially with police involved. And if they were experimenting, how were they supposed to be documenting any of this? Could they have not contacted the local news? Sure, not everyone would, but a number of the involved parties have been filmed on television about the event, so it's not like they're camera shy. Maybe they just didn't think of it. Or maybe they did experience water problems in the house. There is the possibility of a leaky roof, especially in winter, which is when the events took place. Water is the bane of property ownership, and roofs and flashing and all that. Too often, by the time you realize there's a problem, it's been going on for a while, and the damage you see is just the tip of the iceberg. It's one of the reasons I won't have a skylight. Also, it's possible that the landlord didn't know about plumbing that was in the house on the other side. Maybe he had bought the house and plumbing had been moved around. It's certainly possible. And again, with it being in winter, it's possible that the pipes in that wall froze and water under pressure will fly sideways. It just doesn't sound that unreasonable. I was scouring my newspaper archive resources, access, the same ones that we use when we record our past periodical episodes, and I cannot find anything on Decker until the arson. That doesn't mean there weren't news articles, local news articles about the original 1983 incidents. My resources are not complete, and I may have just not caught it, but it doesn't give me any further reason to believe it could be true. As it happens, if you come across an article from that time about this whole episode, please let us know about it. As it was, the only news I can find on Decker would be a YouTube clip of the same arson story I saw in a hotel room on WNEP out of Scranton. That occurred back in October of 2011. And he had set fire to the restaurant, as I said earlier, Dana's in Toby Hanna, Monroe County. The report states that he had been hired by the owners to do so and that he had voluntarily turned himself in. WNEP recapped Decker's appearance on the Unsolved Mysteries episode and even interviewed now Detective Wolbert, who continues to assert that he had responded to what was initially a plumbing problem that entered a realm which he could not explain. He reiterated that he witnessed water traveling horizontally through the house. Detective Wolbert, though, in the WNEP interview further stated that it was strange, definitely a plumbing issue, but that he couldn't explain it. He went on to say that Decker's explanation was that his deceased relative had something to do with it, but that the explanation came only from Decker. The television news also ran the headline Fire and Rain because that low-hanging fruit was just too irresistible. Aside from Detective Wolbert, who appeared on camera, nobody else involved in the 1983 incidents were interviewed. According to reporter Reagan Medji, again, I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. According to her, though, they had reached out to more witnesses, but none would come forward, with at least one of them saying what they had seen was just too upsetting and too creepy to talk about. And again, maybe it was. Maybe this is all true. But the detective's statements in 2011 seem much more reasonable to how they were presented during the Unsolved Mysteries episode. It's not hard to think that a police officer might not be able to diagnose a plumbing problem. And maybe it was especially weird. Maybe it was the convergence of several bad things happening at once that led to all this water in the living room. And maybe the people involved were scared, especially with Don telling the story about his abusive grandfather possessing him. Maybe they were. And maybe later it came out that it was a issue of some sort completely within the realm of reality, and that maybe they continue to stick to the story because the story has just grown too big. And maybe too, they don't want the truth to come out that it was a simple thing and that they had overreacted. That seems completely plausible as well. I know there's a lot of people that really defend this story is true, but honest to goodness, they're both compelling stories, but they cannot both be true because it's clearly stated in 1993 that there was an exorcism in the house, which the landlord and the landlord's wife attest to. They said they were in the house, the exorcism occurred, everything was done at the end of a weekend. But in 2011, there's all this claptrap about him controlling rain inside a prison cell, and then the county correctional facility bringing in an exorcism. That doesn't jive with me. Why would they think to invite the landlord? Not even Decker had any sort of relationship with the landlord. Either way, this is the story of Don Decker, Rainman, and now arsonist. It's an interesting story, but I think it's well past time to put the paranormal claims of this one to bed. We've brought up Henry W. Shoemaker a few times. We've read some stories, we've taken some quotes from him. We even did an entire profile on him that is our episode 35. In fact, our very first episode cites Henry W. Shoemaker, and I've certainly said before the sentence that his shadow looms large over everything we do here with Bond and I. More than one person has noted, however, that Shoemaker tends to invent or fabricate things. Apparently, his claim was that a lot of the things he heard certainly may not have been true, that he himself did not invent them. They were stories that he had collected from other people while traveling through Pennsylvania. And so, even though a lot, and I think to this day, a majority of the state historical, those blue marker plaques, the historical markers that you see across Pennsylvania were written by him, everything on them kind of comes into question as to the historicity. That doesn't mean, though, that the stories aren't really entertaining. Right with me now, I have a copy of Pennsylvania Mountain Stories, first published in 1911. It's now in the public domain. And of all the books that Shoemaker put out, this slim volume is my absolute favorite because it is entertaining. Shoemaker would put a lot of books out, not only about folklore and mythology of Pennsylvania specifically, but also of the animals that had been and were dying out, were being driven out around the time that he was writing. So again, this comes from 1911, and this is the story, The Black Wolf of Oak Valley. And one of the reasons I like it so much isn't just because it is a typical of a folktale, but it captures a lot of things that are very distinctly Shoemaker. It's his obsession with Pennsylvania, his delving into regional folklore, and conversations about former animals that used to inhabit the wilderness of Pennsylvania. So this is the story, The Black Wolf of Oak Valley. The last time I heard a wolf call in the mountain, said black-headed Bill Williams, was one night in the fall of 1863 when I was home on a furlough from the Army. We were discussing the passing of panthers, wolves, and other animals from Pennsylvania on Bill's spacious porch, which overlooked the Susquehanna Valley with the towering Allegheny Mountains far to the north that seemed to be an impenetrable wall between us and the different race of people in New York State. On the bench beside Bill and myself sat a Methodist preacher in a baby chair 4 sizes too small for him, whose expression seemed to denote that he secretly disapproved of everything concerning Bill except his wife's excellent chicken dinners. Yes, it was in the fall of 1863, but then wolves have been killed much recenter than that, but not around here. There are too many railroads and hunters. They did kill a queer kind of black wolf back in Oak Valley about 12 years ago. I was over there cutting ties at the time, but I always thought it was more devil than wolf. What is that? Said I, who was surprised to find that even the side-whiskered preacher present, we were to hear a spook story. Well, said Bill, there was a fellow over there in the east end of the valley named Silas Werniger, a lazy cuss who never cut a cord of wood in his life, and one Saturday night he was at old Tommy Mert's hotel in Youngmanstown and got into a row with a couple old farmers, and before they could stop him, he had shot both. One died and was on his horse and off into the mountains. After a couple weeks, he tired of playing catamount, and at night used to visit his wife and children who lived in a log cabin on the outskirts of Jacobsburg. At first people did not like to tell on him, but it leaked out and a posse surrounded him one morning before daybreak. But his dog gave an alarm and he decided not to come out. The constables then decided to go in after him, and standing in the second-story window he riddled 2 of them with bullets as they were battering down the door of the fresh-cut telegraph pole. Werniger kept up the shooting until his ammunition was exhausted, and then someone in the posse, I think it was Sam Himes, pitched some burning rags through the garret window and set the house on fire. Mrs. Werniger and the 2 little ones ran out to safety, but Silas shouted that he would never be taken alive and coolly cut his throat with a razor. When he didn't come out, the crowd ran into the burning building and found him lying dead. They were just able to get his body out before the roof fell, and they laid him by the well until the coroner came. After that it was over. The question came up the funeral. The Lutherans had a graveyard, and so had the evangelicals, but there was a kick from both parties about burying a murder and a suicide in consecrated ground, and besides they said that Silas's father was a Jewish peddler. So to quiet things down, he was buried after night in the center of a grove of 30 white oaks, not far from the road that runs between Jacobsburg to Youngmanstown. All was well until the cold weather came in. Then the children said they saw a big black shaggy dog hanging around the oak grove, and some young men who were looking for chestnuts one Sunday afternoon saw it and said that it wasn't a dog at all but a big black wolf. The old men at the hotel said they hadn't been a wolf in these parts for 20 years, and the ones they saw were grayish-brown and never black. Finally, old Ira Slopey saw it. He had killed a lot of wolves in Clearfield County just after the war. He was positive it was a wolf, but its color was a bit strange. He chased it out of the grove and hit it several times with stones. He organized a hunting party, and 20 men, mostly younger fellows, went out to kill the ugly beast. They found it in the grove, scampering in and out among the trees. Sometimes it would stop and paw the earth. "It's there to dig up that murderer's body and eat it," said old Ira. Just when they had surrounded it, it darted between the legs of old Ira itself, and 20 muskets and rifles were fired after it, and it disappeared into the brush. When the smoke cleared away, it was found that old Ira had been shot through the ankle and is a cripple to this very day. That broke up the organized hunt, but several boys took their dogs to the grove, but they would not leave the high road, although their owners beat them soundly and repeatedly threw them over the fence. Women became so frightened they would not use the road, after several had fainted when they saw the monster darting in and out among the trees. The situation became so unpleasant that it was decided that the wolf must be gotten rid of at any cost. Previously, no one had been given to a supernatural origin of the wolf, but one day Sam Himes chased a deer clear over Spring Run Bridge, and as he was near the home of the famous witch, Granny Myers, he stopped in and told her the whole story. "Goshens," he said, "I knew that business all along. That ain't no wolf, you foolish. That's poor Sal Werniger, spook. He ain't been happy since they planted him in the lonesome woods. If you go back and put him in the Lutheran cemetery, you'll see no more of that wolf. Sam Himes dropped the chase then and there and went back to Jacobsburg. He got the ear of all, even poor crippled Ira Sloopy, at the hotel that very night. Nothing was said publicly, but the next morning all that remained of Silas Verniger was dug up and buried beside the body of his mother in a Lutheran cemetery. That Saturday night, Sam Himes announced that he had seen and killed the black wolf at the edge of the oak grove. For months afterwards, old Ira Sloopy would say to him in a knowing way, "When are you going to show me that wolf scalp? And remember, you've got to give me half of the bounty."